I think we can at least get started on the introductions, and we can start to move into the program. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining today. My name is Ryan Anderson. I'm the Director of Industry Relations for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. In that role, I help to connect the resources of the university with the private sector with a focus on research and development collaborations that involve the faculty and students of the university and companies. This academic year, Industry Relations and the School of Computing partnered to help to advance industry collaborations specifically on experiential learning that is a core component of the upper division undergraduate students graduation program in the form of the senior design program. And so we're here today to talk a little bit about how senior design works, meet the team, hear from a company that's been involved in senior design. And then before we move into questions and answer, I'll return to the mic and we'll describe just a bit about the state funding program that's available that could offset 50% of the expense of the senior design project. So here is the team. I think we're going to probably hear from everybody today.
And I'll introduce CJ O'Hara, who's our guest panelist today. CJ comes to us as a graduate of UNL in computer science. He's also has experience working with FireSpring as a software engineer for 6 years, and his most current job is with Hudl as a senior engineer since 2020. His senior design involvement has been extensive. He's been a coach with us for 4 academic years since 2018, and then this year as a Hudl employee, he is currently active in sponsoring a project. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about his experiences as both a coach and a sponsor. Chris.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I'm Chris Bowen. I'm the School of Computing's Assistant Director for Capstone, which means, among other things, that I'm responsible for our senior design program. As Ryan said, all of our majors have to go through the program. So our computer science majors and our computer engineering majors each do a year of senior design. Our software engineering majors, and this is unique to UNL, our software engineering majors actually have to do 2 years of capstone. So they do senior design in their junior year, and then they do it again in their senior year. So the primary benefit to them and to their future employers is that they graduate with a lot of hands-on experience. But it also feeds back into our senior design program to bring a little bit of experience to those teams, so that most teams have someone who's done this before. The principal advantage to the students, whether they're computer science, computer engineering, or software engineering majors, is it gives them this opportunity to work on a real world project. This is not a contrived project. This is not a project that they are making up just for the sake of doing the bare minimum to graduate. These are real world projects, either sponsored by industry or sponsored by someone within the university who has a problem that needs to be addressed. So that's a tremendous advantage to them. Our teams comprised of 5 to 6 students. This year we're leaning a little more toward the 6 side, but in general we found that 5 to 6 is a good sized team. These projects last 2 semesters. So in the first semester, they spend a lot of time understanding what the problem is up front, initially trying to understand what the problem is, and that their understanding continues to evolve. And they do some planning and they get up to speed. And then ideally by the semester break, they're going to have something that sponsors can work with, probably not fully functional to be sure, but something that they can kick the tires on and get some user testing and provide some really good feedback to the students so that they can then continue their development effort in the second semester. Benefits to the sponsors is this is a relatively low cost project. I mean, if you compare this to what you would pay some consultant company to work on a project, it's going to be a lot more than what we charge. To be fair, though, our students are entry level. But there are other advantages too. Of course, you get the intellectual property at the end, and that's what some sponsors are interested in is the actual product. Other sponsors see other benefits. So some of the sponsors view this as a recruiting pipeline. And in fact, number of sponsors have turned around and hired members of their team. So you can almost think of this as kind of an 8 or 9 month interview process. Some of our sponsors just see this as an opportunity to feed back into the software development environment. A rising tide lifts all boats, and they see this as a way to kind of give back and improve the quality of graduates. Getting back to the intellectual property issue, everything is protected by an NDA, so you can rest assured that they're not going to go off and steal your big ideas. Next slide, please. What it takes for you is the financial commitment. So in 2022 to 23, our industry sponsors, we charged them $17,500. That figure is going to go up for the 2023 to 24 year. I don't know what it will be. And so as kind of an early bird special, if you commit to a project before I figure out what our rate for next year will be, I'll charge you this year's rate. There is also some time commitment. So 1 hour a week is kind of the steady state to meet with the student team. Leading into the project, you'll also need to provide a detailed description of the project, which we will include as the statement of work, but also provide to the students as a part of their preferencing process. So this is a big thing, is that the students work on projects they want to work on. They go through the project descriptions, and we also have you record what we call a pitch video to try to encourage students to work on your project, and then they identify what projects they want to work on. This year, a little over half the students got their first choice. And then like 99% of the students got one of their top 4 choices. Like I said, this is a big thing that we're very proud of, that students work on projects they actually want to work on. And then we also will ask you to complete a sponsor survey 3 times a semester so that you can provide some feedback for our faculty graders to use.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the team structure, how senior design teams work. If you look in the upper left box of this, you'll see the student squad box. And so like Chris said, our teams are made up of 5 or 6 students, one of which is the product manager and one is the development manager. Those are more maybe senior students, and they pick a squad lead. Between the 2 of them, who is the overall lead, will work directly with sponsors and is a first point of contact when doing things, interacting with the sponsor. The rest of the team is made up of developers, and they work together to deliver your product. Over to the right is the sponsor team. Some sponsors have a single person who comes every week to sponsor meetings and works with the team. Other sponsors have a large team, and sometimes even bring partner organization members. So it could be anywhere from 1 to, I've seen up to, close to half a dozen or more people that show up on the sponsor team to represent the sponsor team. Down below in this box is the support that we give the students from a faculty and staff perspective, as well as industry volunteers. So I'm a project manager, and so is Bill Browning. We bring industry experience as project managers, program managers out in the industry, and we provide best practices and guidance to the teams on how to run and manage projects. And then there's the tribe lead. That's the role name on senior design projects for the UNL faculty member who guides the students, grades the students in classroom-based activities. More of grading-based activities, assignments, that kind of thing. But they're also there in sponsor meetings, as well as Bill and I, to help support the team in running the project. And then there's our industry volunteers who come into us as industry volunteers, and they have lots of different expertise that they impart to the students. So this is more about them. There's typically one coach for every team, although if we run into any roadblocks, we pull in different coaches from the entire pool. Coaches are industry volunteers, as I said, and as Chris said, they sign an NDA. And they're basically, one of the key advantages or benefits to them is their impartial, non-grading support to the students. And they really brought a lot. And you're going to hear more about them from CJ later. Next slide. Here's some of the technologies that our students use or our project teams use. These are not, this is not a comprehensive list. These are some of the most common ones. Typically, our teams work with sponsors to see if there's a preference and see if there's, the teams tend to align with sponsor technologies and architectures so that it's easy in transition time for the sponsor to take over the software or the product. But if the sponsor does not have any ideas or preferences, the students will propose some technologies that they feel like would work best. Next slide. And here's the types of products, or excuse me, types of projects that we have. Pretty much every one of these is represented over the last year or two. We have all these different types of projects in our portfolio from the past academic year or more. Predominantly, we have web development projects and mobile application projects, but we have all of these represented throughout the last few years. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over now to Bill, who's going to talk to us about a successful project.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, so here's just a few bullet points on what we think make a successful project. Obviously, strong sponsor team participation is a big one. Not only, as Chris mentioned earlier, do we spend that 1 hour a week attending weekly sponsor meetings, but also to be available during the week to answer questions. A sponsor team that can provide support through the project, whether it be technical or functional. I have a few sponsors who bring a couple people to each sponsor meeting in the hopes of answering questions or to help along with any issues. For the project itself, we look for an appropriately scoped project with well-defined goals. A project that is not on your company's critical path, but what could include a flexible timeline. We see success in projects in the early stages, allowing the students and the sponsors to brainstorm options for success. Empowering the students to bring forth ideas on how to best proceed gives them a sense of investment to the project. And that isn't just a project to complete because we're making them do that in this class. Next slide, please. One of our longest and most successful collaborations has been with DMSI, a company based out of Omaha, Nebraska. DMSI builds customer-facing software for the lumber and building materials industry. This is DMSI's 4th project in a row with Senior Design. The first 3 years, I think, were extremely successful. DMSI thinks so as well. 2 of those first 3 projects are in production today. And the 3rd one that we just finished this past May is close to being integrated with their Agility ERP system. The students this year are off to an extremely strong start, expecting to finish their project a little bit before the end of next semester. So that's a win for DMSI again. DMSI meets each one of those talking points on the previous slide regarding what makes a successful project. They are one of those sponsors that routinely bring 5 or 6, sometimes even as high as 10 people with them to each sponsor meeting. Each of them have a different focus. They bring UI UX experts all the way down to technical, such as database integration. The reason they do that is so that any questions or issues raised in those meetings can be answered in a timely manner. DMSI also uses Senior Design to meet and hire our students. Last count, we have 4 that they've hired over the last 2 or 3 years. So it's definitely a mutually beneficial partnership for both. Next slide, please. Jason Nemi is the Vice President of Research and Development with the MSI, and he's gave us a couple of these quotes that we wanted to share with you today. Jason was the product owner for the first 3 years that DMSI was a sponsor. This year, he turned that over to one of his new recruits, Adam, who is actually a student of senior design a few years ago, and is one of those that I mentioned that DMSI has hired over the last couple of years. One part that I like to call out in the second paragraph is some advice that they offer for new sponsors, and that would be to clearly define the outside lines of your lane that you want the project to live in and the end goal of the project, while allowing the students to explore different ways to get there. I think that sums up what makes a successful project, what will allow a sponsor to get the most out of senior design, and allow the students to get the most out of senior design as well. Next slide. So at this point, I'd like to reintroduce CJ O'Hara. He's going to talk about what it's like being the coach.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I titled the slide "Why Being a Coach is Awesome." As Melanie mentioned earlier, I've been doing this for I was coaching for 4 years, and now I'm a sponsor, so I have a bit of input on coaching here. First of all, I want to get a couple of things out of the way. Experience in the tech industry is important and like required, but being in a technical role is not. Technical decisions themselves will be made by the sponsors and the team. So as a coach, you're more there to help with professional guidance and feedback. So the types of guidance I provide as a coach would be how to translate just like day-to-day workplace communications into something the students might understand. Some of that is technical, some of that is non-technical. It's just experience that they don't have real world experience with. A lot of times they're taking presentations, they're building presentations to present to their sponsors on like release meetings, which are kind of important highlights throughout the year. Providing some critical feedback for those presentations to kind of get rid of the fluff and add more of the important things has been kind of a great kind of sticking point to being a coach. Also helping, and this is probably one of the more important bullets here, is just helping the students keep on track for deadlines by identifying extraneous work. So a lot of times you're working with a larger sponsor team and they have lots of ideas and they have lots of, okay, after we get this built, we want to go here, here, and here. Helping the students identify which part of that is like MVP versus which part of that is extraneous and maybe a future down the road item is kind of helpful for them to see, so they can, as a coach, you kind of you're kind of seeing the forest through the trees where the students might get a little lost navigating those sorts of paths. As a coach, it's really rewarding to see these projects come to life. I don't have a stake in the company they're building this for. I have a stake in these students, and seeing them grow and build these tools over time is quite rewarding. You get to watch this project grow from just like a briefing all the way through a deliverable product through the course of these 2 semesters. And the best part is you're the hero. So as a coach, even the small things are big for these students. So helping them navigate through this project is really rewarding. And then being a coach is quite a minimal time commitment. It can be done fully remote if you're not meeting in person or not capable of it. And then, yeah, it's just about an hour a week, so it's quite minimal. So I think that about sums up coaching. And now I'll transition into sponsorship. This is kind of my new role here. My first year sponsorship, so take some of this with a grain of salt, but I think I already have learned quite a bit. So here's some tips and tricks. This is similar to coaching. You don't need to be an engineer to be the kind of the lead role of the sponsor part of the project. But what is important is being able to provide face-to-face time with technical roles that are more live closer to that project's code. Maybe they're integrating a new feature into an existing system. Just being able to provide those face-to-face times so you can get questions answered and like lay the groundwork for a successful project. Know internally who your stakeholders are. I think for me personally, there are probably 10 or so different stakeholders across Huddle on this year's project, and just keeping them informed and up to date, kind of asynchronously in a Slack channel has been helpful, but also kind of point in time meetings outside of releases that make a big difference in making sure the project stays on track and doesn't lose sight of its end goals. Keeping the scope of the project is small is quite important. But I like to include the stretch goals and kind of nice to haves, kind of exploratory room at the end of the project. If the students can wrap up the bulk of the MVP product and then be able to explore from there and see what else they can add or append on to the end and grow that project even more is kind of exciting. So defining a clear end goal up front is quite important to make sure they reach that point. That's the important point, and then any extra work is a bonus. I think it's important to clear obstacles as soon as possible for the students. So being available, like Bill was saying, being available throughout the week to provide, to answer questions, but also taking the time up front to really define what the project is and link up documentation that you might have internally is quite important. This will give them the most opportunity out of their development time. So my team this year is meeting a couple of times a week for a few hours each time in order to, and that's the bulk of their development time. So if you can get their questions answered prior to those times, or right at the beginning of those times, that can really make the most impact out of the development time that they have. I like to treat our students on the team as if they're employees of the company. So giving them access to internal resources has been very beneficial, and also kind of give them an idea of what it's like to work for my company has been quite important, because I mean, it'd be nice to be able to hire some of these students after they graduate. I myself has tried to be as flexible as possible with my time. I think this is kind of recovering some of the stuff I just said, but it's quite important to be able to remove those roadblocks and be available when necessary. And then finally, I like to share updates internally. So when the students when we found out who our team was, we asked them for bios, and we blasted it out on our company newsletters. They've been in office a few times, so we wanted to make sure their faces were known, and other Huddlies were excited about their presence and just welcome them to the company and just yeah, it's a big deal for these students, but it's also a big deal for the company. And I think that about covers it for now. I'm sure I'll have plenty more tips and tricks and learnings after this school year.
Well, thank you, CJ. As part of the next steps, then, if you were to sign up to be a sponsor, the first thing you would do would be to submit a project request. I'll share the links to these in the chat and share them with you in an email afterwards so that you have them. But the first step would be to submit a high-level project request. And this is just so that we know that you're interested and you want a project. And it's not complicated, it doesn't take very long. It's on our main website. And it's just that here's the name of our company, here's the point of contact, and here's what we'd like to do for the project. After that, we'll walk you through every step. We're here to help with everything. So we'll send out a template for a full detailed project description, and we take part of that, and it becomes a part of your statement of work for a contract or an agreement that you sign with the university. After that, like Chris said, we'll have you record a pitch video to use in the selection process of your project, and to entice the students to work on your project. So this is a page off of our main website, and we have information on being a sponsor, being a coach, sponsor overview, and you see on the right side, there's a red button that says project request. So on our main website, you can just go to that. Also, we have orientation videos for once you do sign up. And usually the semester starts this next fall, August 21st. And then team selection is around the first week of August. And then kickoff meetings are usually the first week of September, where coaches are matched up with the teams based on the project and the coach's skill set. And then the teams are matched up. They reach out to both the sponsor and the coach and set up recurring meetings. And then everything's kicked off. Typically billing goes out in September, but I think as Chris said, if you sign up now before February, you will be guaranteed to get this last year's price. And we're very flexible on actual pay terms. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about the grant opportunities.
Thanks, Kara. Appreciate it. So we're fortunate in the state of Nebraska to have a suite of funding programs that were originated in 2011 under the Business Innovation Act. And one of those is the Nebraska Academic R&D Grant Program, which is a matching grant program where companies are applicants to the Department of Economic Development through an online application portal. And if a company has a full-time person and some level of operations in Nebraska, it need not be headquarters, they are indeed eligible to apply. And it's a fairly simple application process. Once you have your statement of work together, there's a simple budget, establish some benchmarks, and Ben Kuspa and his team over at the Department of Economic Development are very hands-on, and they're available for questions and meetings in advance of and during the process of your proposal to help you be best prepared for that. It is up to $100,000 for a phase 1 project, which is a 1-for-1, dollar-for-dollar match for anything that would not be considered a value-added agriculture project. And then for the companies, it's a more favorable match at $4 to $1 if it is considered value-added agriculture. Any questions about that qualifications, again, would be directed towards Ben Kuspa at the Department of Economic Development, and we will follow up with some information about at least a link to the program, if not the grant guidelines, to everyone who's participating in the webinar today. And there's a couple examples of some companies that have been awarded one of those virtual incision as a UNL startup, and then New Tech Food Science is a partner of ours at Nebraska Innovation Campus. It's a very, very simple grant process, much easier than a private foundation, orders of magnitude easier than a federal grant. And so they usually get reviewed within 2 weeks. If the queue is long, it could take 2 cycles of review, which would be at the latest 4 weeks. This is the first year that they have specifically approved funding for student projects and are well aware of the partnership between industry relations and the School of Computing to support the senior design projects. And so all you would need to do is just let them know that it's that kind of project. And the success rate for new grantees is very high. They like to spread the money around. So we certainly invite you to evaluate this grant opportunity to offset the direct costs of a senior design project. And I'm happy on the university side to talk with anyone who would like to be involved or be an applicant, as I've worked with several dozen of these grant applications in the past. So I think that concludes our program. And so at this point, we can move to questions and answers. And I believe the Q&A function is enabled, and you can ask those by opening Q&A in the little thought bubbles that are on the bottom ribbon of your Zoom window. And Kara just posted in the chat. You can see all of the links to the senior design program itself, sponsor orientation videos, and the project request submission. And also the grant information for the Nebraska Department of Economic Development academic R&D grant. There's a question that asks, do you know of any grants for UNL units? I do not. I don't believe that these would qualify for any of the Office of Research and Economic Development internal grant programs, and the company would need to be the applicant, not an academic unit or a nonprofit. You might, of course, ask locally, ask your department chair, or check with your dean's office about any internal funding that they might have available. It's another great question. I would like to know if it would be possible to consult on the feasibility of various projects ahead of developing a full scope of work. The answer is absolutely. We are a very accessible team, and we are here to help, and we want to scope the projects correctly. This is probably the most important aspect to ensure, as CJ and others have articulated on the call, it needs to be right-sized and right-scoped so that students at their level of maturity in the industry can execute and can learn, and that also you are satisfied with what the outputs are. I might ask Mel, Chris, or Bill to add any comments on iteration and engagement with sponsor prospects on developing full scope of work.
Yes, certainly. This is, even if you don't ask us to, we will take a look at what you're trying to do and give you feedback on whether we think it's too much or too little, or if it just doesn't look like it's a good fit, because some of the key part of the success, as Ryan and others have mentioned, is that it be doable by the team, and at the same time that it be challenging enough that that's not just something they're going to knock out in a couple of months and be done. And then we want you to be very happy with it. If you come in expecting something that is realistically a 3-year project and you want them to be able to finish it in 8 months, we're going to have that discussion about partitioning the scope so that we perhaps could make it into a multi-year project, because you can't squeeze 3 years into 8 months. It just doesn't fit. So yes, that is definitely part of our process.
And Chris, before you, maybe you could, if anyone on the call is sort of at that point of trying to decide about, or to consult, what's their step that they should take?
Well, one option is to submit that web form, and even if you just have only the vaguest ideas, that'll bring it to our attention, and that can start the conversation. That's probably the best approach.
The project request.
Yes.
Yep. And again, that link is in the webinar chat, and you can follow that. We have another question that asks if the team size of 6 students is fixed. What if a project is suitable for a smaller size team?
That question hasn't come up before. We can certainly have that conversation. Like I said, we find that 5 to 6 is a good sized team. I might be able to be talked into something that's 4. What I would rather do in that situation is see if we can add some stretch goals, because that way you get even more bang for the buck. But yeah, that's a conversation we can have.
Yeah. And, as has been mentioned, by Chris earlier, and is one advantage for some profiles and types of sponsors having a larger team is that this is sort of an education to employment pathway. And so there is a clear upside regardless of the amount of people hours that might be involved to accomplish a specific statement of work. Broader engagement of students may cast a broader net in terms of getting interviews and potentially onboarding some of these students after graduation. That's the last question we have at this point in the chat. Again, we welcome you to ask more now, or we are certainly available after the webinar by email and by connecting with you all through the computing.unl.edu senior design website. Maybe before we close out and we give our participants an opportunity to think about any potential questions they might ask now, I might invite CJ specifically, pardon me for putting you on the spot, if you might have any closing thoughts after hearing everything that's been said and maybe any amplification based upon responses to the questions that have been posed.
Sure, I can be on the spot. That is totally fine. I can maybe talk a little bit more about my experience when it comes to like discovering scope of work and how best to utilize the team of 6. First of all, the team of 6 is in fact doing more than just developing your project. They are doing like typical sprint type work. They use usually an agile framework. And that is like internal to their team, but they're coming up with the stories or tickets to facilitate the work. They're coming up with a plan of action. They're working in 2-week sprints. So they're having retros and kind of refinements and scoping their like pointing their tickets and that sort of thing. So they're doing more than just you give them work and they build the thing. They're getting real world kind of experience of working on a software team at a traditional technology company. So roles like project management is generally handled by staff at the university, but like on my team, I also have a project manager that I work closely with to make sure that our internal goals for the project stay on track, and then we can help the students facilitate or answer questions about their roadmaps and like where they think the work makes sense to go next or whatnot. So they're also, you know, light QAing their work, light designing their work, and just participating in many roles surrounding the development of these projects. So even a smaller scope typically lends to just more refined work delivered at the end because of they're going through all of these other practices. I think keeping a team of 6 busy is not traditionally the problem here. It's defining that value at the end for them to deliver on that really makes success coming from your project or not. As far as internally this year with Hudl and discovering the scope of work, what I did is I reached out to several different teams that I was somewhat familiar with within the boundaries of Hudl, and I said, hey, we've been approached to to sponsor a senior design capstone project. Please bring ideas. And I set an internal meeting for that. We spent half an hour to an hour to discuss probably 15 different project ideas, and landed on one that just felt right, both internally, that wouldn't roadblock any of our internal teams, but also something that we would be excited about and ready to push to production at the deliverable stage of this project. So something that's still important and something that will still be utilized. We didn't want to give these students some oddball project that may or may not be used in the long run, because that is not beneficial for either party in that respect. That might cover it for now. I'm happy to continue on. I see you have a couple more questions, so I'll let you get to that.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. I think that was really insightful, and particularly the last point about, you know, establishing a mutually beneficial value proposition is very important. And again, you know, these are students in their learning capacity, and that's very much the focus at the end of the day. What this is about is trying to help best prepare our students to be competitive in the workplace, and frankly, from an economic development perspective, to keep our best and bright working for some of our most innovative companies right here in Nebraska. We're certainly not opposed to exporting our talent to the coasts and exciting other ecosystems, but we certainly want to do what we can to help educate and then offer opportunities for good jobs right here in Nebraska. So the last question is for R&D projects. Those that are UNL internally funded, the scope will need to develop along the way. Is the scope of work required for those at beginning of project 2?
I think we would need to characterize some bounds on the scope, but yeah, we definitely have projects where there's discovery along the way of what is actually being done. We would just need to work with you to make sure it's phrased right in the statement of work. One thing that this made me think of, saying that we have at least 2. I think I saw a third guest who are internal to UNL. The figure that I quoted earlier for our fee, that 17.5, that is the industry rate. For our University of Nebraska sponsors, it's a different cost structure. It'll cost you less. I'm just going to refer you to the website to see what that is, rather than quote the actual number. But kind of the downside, though, is I cannot offer you that early bird discount. Under our rules, I have to charge you a particular rate, and that's based on what our expenses are in a given fiscal year. But like I said, we don't mark up what we charge the internal sponsors.
Yeah, I might add a quick comment too, since the question is about internally funded work. I would ask the faculty member who and others that are thinking about this to not necessarily think about the scope of work that you're submitting at the beginning of this project the same way that you would think about submitting a scope of work for an NSF grant or contract. There's a greater amount of fluidity that's going to be in this project, and I think some of that is just due to the agile approach that's going to be taken with some of these projects. But there does need to be a good amount of clarity around what the expectations in terms of an endpoint are, so we can understand time commitments and types of technologies that might need to be involved, because there is a learning component if the students don't necessarily have all the tools in their tool set at the outset of the project. So there might be a ramp up period. But again, if you consult the website and just put the bones of a concept together and submit it, that starts the dialogue with the senior design team, and they can work with you on that scope of work. Last question. Is there a specific window of time or deadline for initiating a project? Do we have the slides that have the timeline?
Yeah, we didn't put a specific deadline on there this time.
Okay.
We're happy to accept projects, up through hopefully the end of June. That's the ideal time. If you wanted to get in on less, the better price, I would say sign up as soon as you want to participate before February. But then we would accept projects through the end of June for sure. And if our portfolio is full, hopefully we'll have a waiting list then.
Thanks, Kara.
Lastly, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who attended and participated, and really, really appreciate the support of Senior Design. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. I suppose I'll make that the last call for questions. Give you just a few moments in case there's something that comes to mind. Well, unless something else pops up, I'll take this opportunity first to thank Suzanne for setting up the webinar and for your support, much appreciated. The senior design team, Chris, Bill, Mel, Kara, and lastly, CJ, thanks so much. Having the industry perspective is very much appreciated, and I think provides a good amount of insight into, you know, what this looked like from that perspective. And then lastly, thank all the attendees. We are very excited for your interest. We think this is a wonderful program for creating new and innovative engineered solutions for your company. It's a great opportunity to engage really creative, thoughtful, and skilled students, and ways to look to build your workforce pipeline out of School of Computing. So with that, please go to the websites that have been posted by Kara in the chat. And we will look forward to hearing from you soon and working with you on the senior design project. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.